We start in 2008, the inaugural Singapore Grand Prix. It would become the first race ever hosted at night and was the centerpiece of the ongoing Massa vs Hamilton title fight. The two were separated by just 1 point going into this one, and qualifying was going to be important, it being a street track and all. Massa would drop 6/10 on Hamilton on Saturday to take the first pole at the track, with Lewis lining up in second. Massa would get away well from the line, with Hamilton almost being overtaken by Raikkonen into the first corner. And behind, everyone survived the first few corners. Near the back, Alonso, who had qualified a lowly 15th thanks to a problem in Q2, had elected for an aggressive first stint where he would refuel early on and pray for a safety car to work in his favour. And 2 laps later, he would get that luck when his teammate binned it in the wall in the final sector, bringing out the safety car. Because of the bent rules in F1 at the time, the pit lane was closed until the safety car had collected all of the drivers up, and so once it was open, it caused carnage. Massa had built up a nice lead to Hamilton in the opening act of the race, and so when he was able to pit, he came in for some new tyres and to get some more fuel on board. But while the mechanics were getting to work on the fuel situation, the green light came on and Massa bolted, taking the fuel pump with him to the end of the pit lane. The mechanics sprinted down the length of the pits as Ferrari had the first garage to disconnect the fuel pump, but by the time he was safe to leave the pits, he had dropped way down the order, and Hamilton looked set to get a massive result over him in the title race. All this while Alonso became the de facto leader behind a few cars that hadn't pitted or had to serve penalties for pitting before the pit lane was open. How lucky was he, right? As the race progressed, the order became Alonso from Hamilton from Coulthard. In the final pit stops, there would be no calamities for Alonso and Hamilton, and even a late safety car partly caused by Massa did little to affect them. Having heavily fueled earlier in the race, the safety car allowed Rosberg to get up to second, and that's how it would finish, with Alonso winning the inaugural Singapore Grand Prix, and Rosberg and Hamilton rounding off the podium. An incredibly fortuitous race for Alonso, a best career result at the time for Rosberg, and a very important one for Hamilton in his championship fight, as he went on to win the title by 1 point. But all in all, the first Grand Prix had been a chaotic one. Now let's move on to 2009. In the run-up to the 2009 edition, we had 2 big stories. The title fight going on between the Brauns and the Red Bulls, and the reveal of how Alonso got so lucky in 2008. Turns out that the Renault team had come up with a plan to rescue the team's season, pit Alonso early, and then get Piquet to crash, bring out the safety car, and hand Alonso the race lead. This worked to perfection, and while some speculated how Alonso had gotten so lucky, no one thought a team would be desperate enough to race fix in the big 2008. Renault were in fact that desperate. And it's funny as well, because they won the following race at Fuji completely legit. They didn't even need the Singapore race. This information had come out thanks to Piquet himself releasing it, probably in protest to being dropped by the team halfway through the season. Renault were found guilty, Briatore was given a lifetime ban from F1, which never really happened, and Pat Simmons, second in command, was given a 5-year ban. Renault would lose all their sponsors, the team was given a suspended ban, and Grosjean attempted to recreate the incident in one of the practice sessions. So that's the background, now let's see how the race went. In qualifying, Button wouldn't even make it past Q2, qualifying 12th, as his closest rival Barrichello ended up in 5th after crashing in Q3. The Red Bulls were also up in 2nd and 4th, with Hamilton grabbing his 3rd pole in 4 races in the hot and cold McLaren. On the race start, Hamilton would keep his lead and Vettel would lose a position to Rosberg. In the pit stops, Rosberg would go over the white line on the pit exit and earn himself a drive-through penalty, ruling him out of a good result. Further behind, Sutil would try an opportunistic move on Alguersuari, spun around, and while trying to lose as little time as possible, rejoined the track and crashed into Nick Heidfeld, bringing out the safety car. With Rosberg out of the way, it was now a 2-horse race at the front between Hamilton and Vettel, with the pair exchanging fastest laps and staying close to one another. Vettel would come in for his final stop on lap 39, but while trying to gain as much time as possible, he ended up speeding in the pit lane, earning him a drive-through penalty. This would be worsened by his outlap, where he drove over a curb and damaged the underside of his car, leading Hamilton to drive off into the distance. He ended the race nearly 10 seconds ahead of Glock in 2nd and Alonso in 3rd, who dedicated his podium to Briatore. Vettel didn't end up capitalizing on the Brawn's mistakes and ended the race in 4th, just ahead of Button and Barrichello, meaning the gaps barely changed in the championship standings. Now let's look at 2010. The 2010 Singapore Grand Prix was a high-stakes affair. After Monza, we had a 5-way title fight on the cards, with 1st down to 5th separated by 24 points thanks to the expanded point system for 2010. And a win was going to be needed for any one of these guys. And the first step to getting that win was getting pole on a hard-to-overtake street circuit. On Saturday, it would be Alonso who brought his Ferrari to the top, 67 milliseconds ahead of Vettel, with Hamilton, Button and Webber rounding off the top 5. On race day, Alonso got an okay start and just about covered Vettel into turn 1, with the top 5 staying staying as it was. Further back, Heidfeld got into incidents with both of the Force India cars. The safety car would come out 2 laps later when Liuzzi pulled over with damaged suspension. Webber would pit under the safety car aiming for a long second stint, but he lost time waiting for cars to pass him in the pits. After the restart, Alonso continued to lead from Vettel, Hamilton and Button, but Webber started to make progress back up to the top of the grid. On lap 29, Alonso and Vettel came into the pits together, and thanks to refueling being banned for 2010, it was just going to be a battle of the tyre changes. But Ferrari made no mistakes and Vettel had a slow getaway, keeping the order as it was. Kobayashi and Senna would crash just under the bridge section, and so another safety car would be called out. After the restart, Alonso continued to lead from Vettel, but Webber was now up to third with Hamilton and Button behind. While trying to lap back markers, Webber got held up and Hamilton tried to take the position. Webber would then hit him as they went around the left-hander of turn 7, giving him a puncture and forcing him to retire a corner later. Schumacher would then rear-end Heidfeld and Renault would pick Kubica from a good position thanks to a slow puncture. He would recover after dropping down to 13th to finish 7th through a series of great overtakes. Kovalainen would retire with a few laps to go after a fire broke out in his green tractor, but back at the front, it would be Alonso who won his second race at Singapore as Vettel hounded him all the way. Webber would round off the podium, extending his championship lead with Hamilton retiring, and Button was 4th. Another great race, so let's move on to 2011. While the previous Singapore Grand Prix had been at the centre of various title fights, 2011 was a bit different. Vettel hadn't won the title yet, but he was 112 points ahead of his closest rival with 6 races to go, and in qualifying, he wanted to secure that second title, going 3.5 tenths quicker than his teammate to claim pole position. On race day, he got away well from pole as his teammate faltered, and Hamilton dropped down a few positions after attempting a lunge for third. Behind, everyone kept it clean. Hamilton attempted to make up for lost time, but while he tried to recover, Vettel had said goodbye to the field and pulled an 8-second lead on Button after just 7 laps, and he didn't look like stopping. Way behind him, Hamilton tried to take 5th off of Massa, but even a good pit stop from McLaren couldn't unsettle Ferrari, who kept Felipe in front. Eventually, Hamilton got close enough to make a realistic move, but Felipe closed the door and took off some of his front wing, giving him a puncture and getting Lewis a drive-through penalty for his troubles. Down in the midfield, Schumacher would have another incident with the Sauber at Singapore, rear-ending Perez this time around and flying into the barriers, bringing out another safety car. Vettel's lead of 20 seconds was wiped out, but on the restart, he got back to work quickly and pulled 4 seconds on Button, who got stuck behind traffic. Button would close up the gap after getting past the traffic, but it wasn't enough to trouble Vettel as he won in Singapore for the first time. Button was 2 seconds behind at the checkered flag, but third place Webber was almost half a minute down on his teammate, with Hamilton recovering up to 5th after his Massa incident early on in the race. This race basically crowned Vettel as champion as Button was his closest rival 124 points behind, with just 125 points left up for grabs. So let's see what happened in 2020. 2012 would see Singapore in the middle of another title fight, with Alonso leading by 37 points to Hamilton, Raikkonen and Vettel coming into the weekend. But in qualifying, it would be Hamilton at the top, 4.5 tenths ahead of Maldonado, with Vettel in 3rd and Alonso in 5th. At the start, Hamilton got away well, but Alonso dropped a few places as Vettel jumped Maldonado for 2nd. Hamilton would make his first stop on lap 12 and kept hold of his lead as Vettel got stuck behind Raikkonen. A bit further back, Alonso was trying to get further up the grid to reduce the effect of Hamilton and Vettel's points hauls, but he needn't worry about Hamilton because Vettel had already figured out that his car was losing oil. Hamilton would retire soon after thanks to his gearbox conking out, and he once again had a good race destroyed by his car's reliability. This put Vettel into the lead, and now his worries were just with Alonso. The Ferrari driver was closing in, and a safety car caused by car decaying allowed everyone to close up to Vettel halfway through. But behind on the restart, Schumacher would have another incident in Singapore, rear-ending a Toro Rosso this time around and retiring him from another race. The safety car came out again, but this did little to deter Vettel, who had the pace and extended his lead from Button and Alonso to 9 and 15 seconds at the flag, putting him right back into championship contention. With Hamilton retiring again, it was unlikely he was going to challenge, but now Vettel was just 29 points behind Alonso, and this win was the start of a 4-race winning streak that won him the title in the end. Vettel was really starting to make a name for himself in Singapore, so let's see if he can make it 3 of 3 in 2013. In 2013, Vettel was once again in front. He came into Singapore off the back of 2 wins in a row and led Alonso in the standings by 53 points. In qualifying, he set his first lap, a very impressive one that put him 6 tenths ahead of 2nd place, and then didn't do another run. Despite drivers behind improving, he kept his pole and saved a set of tyres in the process. Off the line, Rosberg had the better start and took the lead into turn 1 before going off track and ceding position to Vettel. After retaking his lead, Vettel would storm off into the distance, pulling 35 seconds on the pack until Ricciardo crashed crashed and caused a safety car, wiping that out. On the restart, he continued his crusade, lapping 2 seconds a lap faster than anyone else, and then pitted for the second time when he got a big enough gap. From there, he continued to speed off into the distance, finishing 32 seconds ahead of Alonso at the checkered flag. Raikkonen would go from 13th to the podium in this one, with Vettel's teammate retiring on the penultimate lap. It was his third race win in a row and was a part of the record that he set at the end of the season for most consecutive race wins, ending at 9. And obviously, he walked the title because of this. But back to the Singapore track in particular, 2013 would be the first year to not have the infamous Singapore Sling, which was a chicane of very high curbs that caught out its fair share of drivers since 2008. So let's see how it goes in 2014. We're back to a title fight in 2014, and this time it was between Rosberg and Hamilton at the Mercedes team. They came into this one separated by 22 points, and with 6 races to go, it was crucial to grab a win here. Mercedes dominated qualifying as they usually did in 2014, and after Rosberg was on provisional pole on the last runs, Hamilton snatched it away from him seconds later thanks to a time that was 7 milliseconds quicker. On the grid, Rosberg suffered issues with his steering wheel and would be forced to start from the pit lane when he couldn't pull away. So with his closest rival and the fastest car, Lewis got a clean start and led away from Vettel and then Ricciardo, and Alonso outbraked himself into turn 1. Everyone kept it clean at the back for once, and Rosberg was at a major disadvantage. His issues persisted throughout the start as he only had control of his gears and couldn't even keep up with the Marussia. He pitted on lap 14 as Mercedes tried to replace his wheel, but nothing worked and he would be forced to retire, having been failed by his car. This left Hamilton to drive off into the distance, but the fight behind him for the podium spots was a close one. After fighting with Sutil, Perez would lose his front wing as it fell under his car and scattered debris everywhere, bringing out another safety car. Alonso came into the pit under the safety car, and the other challengers for the podium had pitted a few laps before, so as Hamilton sailed away for the second time, the fight for the podium was between Vettel, Ricciardo and Alonso. They stayed close by each other, and after Hamilton pitted late on, fearing a tyre blowout, he came out in between Vettel and Ricciardo. But he quickly overtook Vettel and gapped him by 13.5 seconds in 8 laps, winning the race in comfortable fashion. But joining him on the podium would be both the Red Bull drivers, as Vettel grabbed his best result of the season and Hamilton retook the championship lead, with him now leading Rosberg by 3 points. This point swing was all Hamilton needed, and he'd go on a 5-race winning streak including Singapore and the previous race in Italy, which ultimately won him the title. So let's see how it went in 2015.
Something wrong with my voice. I sound American all of a sudden. Anyways, 2015. Mercedes were in a class of their own once again, and Lewis Hamilton was having his most dominant season to date, leading his teammate Nico Rosberg by 53 points going to the weekend, and Sebastian Vettel not too far behind him. But before anything can begin this weekend, some changes happened within the Manor team, because it would be announced that their driver Roberto Merhi wouldn't be racing. Instead, filling in for Merhi was Alex Rossi, now IndyCar driver and top 5 American of all time. And then he decided to crash an FP2, that's just great. In 2015, Seb was starting to become one of the best around the streets of Singapore, grabbing pole by 0.5 of a second to Daniel Ricciardo, and the Mercedes cars were super uncompetitive this weekend, finishing 5th and 6th respectively in qualifying. On the start, Sebastian Vettel time traveled back to 2013 and left the entire grid, leaving Daniel Ricciardo for dead, and he pulled 3 seconds in a single lap. And shout out Danny Kvyat, I guess. He nearly overtook Kimi Raikkonen going to turn 1. The race will be neutralized by the safety car 12 laps in when Felipe Massa had a crash at Hulkenberg on the pit exit, bringing out the VSC, then the safety car, and then the race again on the restart. Sebastian Vettel back in 2013 mode. He had so much pace this weekend. The only notable thing that happened in the safety car was Danny Kvyat dropping behind both Mercedes cars, since Red Bull boxed him way too early, I think, to try and undercut Kimi Raikkonen, and yeah, he lost his place to Hamilton and Rosberg. Hamilton's car suddenly experienced a power loss, and soon after Rosberg would overtake him, and after a few laps, Lewis Hamilton retires from the Singapore Grand Prix. Amid all this, Sebastian Vettel was controlling the pack, but would see his lead wiped again when another safety car was called because of a fan on the track. But he would still be able to maintain his lead after a free pit stop. Now behind the leaders, after stalling on the grid on lap 1, Max Verstappen was cutting his way through the field. He was even a lap down at one point, and towards the closing stages of the race, him and his teammate Carlos Sainz was chasing down Sergio Perez in the Force India. And oh yeah, fun fact, Sainz also had issues in this race. Although Max was ahead, Tar also decided to give Carlos a go, but Max had other plans.
Okay, we need to swap positions.
And Sebastian Vettel dominantly wins the Singapore Grand Prix, grabbing his third of the season and nearly completing a Grand Slam. He just missed out on the fastest lap because Daniel Ricciardo got it. This puts him only 49 points behind Hamilton in the championship with 6 rounds to spare. But this would ultimately come to nothing as the Mercedes just had an off weekend in Singapore and Hamilton ended up winning with 3 rounds remaining. Anyways, now on to 2016 just saw the 2 Mercedes drivers at the top. You all know the story, Hamilton versus Rosberg, and going into Singapore, the gap between them was just 2 points after Nico Rosberg had a great start to the second half of the season. In practice, Godzilla attacked Max Verstappen. Rosberg qualified on pole, half a second clear of Ricciardo, similar to last year, and his teammate Lewis Hamilton was in third. The pole sitter from the previous year, Sebastian Vettel, had a suspension failure in qualifying, so this sends him to the back of the grid. The front of the grid would get away cleanly, but before we even got to turn 1, Nico Hülkenberg was collected by Carlos Sainz, and somehow there wasn't any collateral damage. On the restart, Rosberg would keep the lead of the race, and Hamilton's issues in turn 5 at qualifying were persisting in the race, and Kimi Räikkönen would eventually overtake him. But he would retake third place as Mercedes pulled off a successful undercut. While all that was happening, Sebastian Vettel was cutting his way from P22 to P5, proving that you can indeed overtake in the tight streets of Singapore. Daniel Ricciardo would come into the box, essentially undercutting Nico Rosberg, and since Mercedes didn't want to lose track position and had missed the boat in terms of pitting Rosberg, they left him out, hoping the race would run out before Ricciardo would overtake him. And it doesn't help with the fact that the Mercedes were overheating their brakes the entire race. But Rosberg kept his cool, managing to the end and won the race by less than half a second, with Lewis Hamilton coming home in third 8 seconds back. Rosberg would take back the championship lead for the first time since Hungary. The next race in Malaysia would be even better for him. Even though Lewis Hamilton won the final 4 races in a row, he still won the championship. And now on to 2017.
Sorry about that. In 2017, we had a new title fight between Vettel and Hamilton. Coming into Singapore, the gap was just 3 points and the two looked inseparable. But then Vettel qualified on pole in Singapore, 3/10 ahead of Verstappen in second, while Hamilton was down in 5th. A great opportunity to retake the lead in the title hunt. On the race start, it was wet for the first time in Singapore, and the top 6 all elected for intermediates. Vettel got an okay start, as did Verstappen, but Räikkönen in 4th got a blistering start. But as Vettel came across the track to cover Max, he didn't see Kimi and the pair squeezed him, retiring Kimi on the spot and seeing Vettel get a huge whack in his side pod. Hamilton tried to go around the outside of the damaged Vettel at turn 1, but Kimi was on a collision course for Max at the first corner, which also sent Alonso flying. Verstappen would retire then and there, and Vettel would spin just a few corners later, allowing Hamilton to lead the race and causing Vettel to have to retire. An absolute nightmare for Ferrari and a dream for Mercedes. With 3 front-running cars out at turn 1, it opened the door for the teams in the midfield to get a massive result, and it looked like Hülkenberg could maybe get his first podium. An early safety car caused by a Kvyat crash brought out the safety car. And then he'd have to survive another restart 25 laps later when Ericsson had his own crash. After running in a good position all race, Hülkenberg would start having issues with an oil leak and retired with 10 laps to go because of it. And after being unchallenged at the front, Hamilton would win the race, turning a 3-point lead over his title rival to a 28-point lead. Ricciardo and Bottas would fill out the podium, and Carlos Sainz would secure a career best 4th at the time for Toro Rosso, while Jolyon Palmer got a crucial 6th place finish as he looked to stay in F1. So this was the first wet race at Singapore after 10 runnings, and it was chaotic. So let's see if it will rain again in 2018. In 2018, it didn't rain again, but it was once again Vettel versus Hamilton at the front. But the title fight had been unraveling for Vettel ever since he crashed out of his home race, and going into one of his best tracks at Singapore, he was 30 points behind Lewis. But little did he know Hamilton was going to pull out a lap from the gods as he put it on pole with 3 purple sectors and a 6/10 margin to Verstappen in second and Vettel in third. On the restart, Hamilton got a great getaway and pulled away from the grid as Verstappen and Vettel squabbled for second. But behind them, Perez and Ocon would crash into each other, leading to a safety car that came out just after Vettel got past Verstappen. Hamilton survived the restart and Vettel would attempt to take the lead via an undercut soon after. He survived this attempt, but Verstappen almost got overtaken, with him him just about holding on to his de facto second place. As the race passed over half distance, Verstappen started to pull away from Vettel and closed in on Hamilton. And when he got caught behind back markers, never changed Sergei Sorokin, that put Verstappen within an inch of getting past. Even Vettel got close. But after that close scare, Hamilton pulled away again and went on to win the 2018 edition by almost 9 seconds to Verstappen and almost 40 to Vettel in third. A very dominant drive from Hamilton, and one that compounded Vettel's dreadful second half of the year and allowed Hamilton to gain more momentum on his way to a 5th World Championship. So let's see what happened in 2019. In 2019, the Mercedes pulled away from the Ferraris and Red Bulls in terms of performance and meant that Hamilton arrived in Singapore 63 points ahead of second place Bottas, his law-abiding teammate, and 99 ahead of the next closest challenger. But despite this, Ferrari and their illegal engines were in fine form, having won in Monza the previous race. And Leclerc's fine qualifying form continues to Singapore, where he would get pole 2 tenths ahead of Hamilton and his teammate Vettel. Leclerc would keep the lead on lap 1 and the order would stay unchanged throughout the first few corners. Vettel tried to get past Hamilton on lap 1 but couldn't quite get past as Hamilton defended well. But it meant that Leclerc started to build a lead as they lost time fighting. With Hamilton so close behind Leclerc, Ferrari pitted Vettel first with no risk. But in doing so, they awoke the Lion of Singapore, who put in one of the best outlaps of all time to take the lead from Leclerc when he came out a lap later. When Hamilton pitted, he fell down the order and up in front, Vettel took the lead from Giovinazzi on lap 31. This left Sebastian to drive off into the distance until a safety car halfway through brought everyone back together again. But on that restart, Vettel once again gapped Leclerc, showing that he had the pace. There were plenty of midfield battles in this one as Ricciardo, Stroll, Giovinazzi and pretty much everyone was involved in a scrap at some point, in the points or not. With 11 laps to go, Kvyat sent a pretty opportunistic move on Raikkonen which retired the Finn and brought out another safety car. But Vettel survived another restart and continued to lead the race, taking what would be his last race win and in typically dominant style at Singapore. On the podium with him was his very unhappy teammate and Max Verstappen, completing a very unexpected result which didn't really affect the championship at all. Hamilton was still way out in front and didn't let off. So let's see what So the 2020 Singapore Grand Prix would be cancelled like many others that year thanks to COVID. So let's move on to 2021. So 2021 got cancelled as well. Let's just move on to 2022. 2022 saw a title fight that once was. It had started off close, but a series of errors by Ferrari and Leclerc made it so heading into the Singapore race weekend, Verstappen was 126 points ahead of the Ferrari driver. And so it was a nice change to the system when Leclerc qualified on pole and Verstappen was down in 8th. His teammate Perez would be in 2nd though. It was the second ever race to start in the wet, and Leclerc didn't get the best start, being overtaken by Perez into turn 1 as everyone tried to keep it on track in the challenging conditions. Verstappen didn't have the best start ever and dropped to 13th on lap 1, but then set about recovering back up the order. 7 laps in, Latifi would invade China and force Zhou to retire from the race and brought out a safety car despite the Alpha pulling off the track. After the restart, Verstappen was up to 8th and his teammate was still leading, and he was making overtakes at places you'd never normally expect. On lap 33, Hamilton made a mistake, going straight on at the turn 5 straight, but escaping with what looked to be a pretty intact front wing. Then 3 laps later, Tsunoda put it in the wall where the sling chicane once was, and he was properly stuck, leading to another safety car. At this point, the race had been running over time, and it would be against the clock instead of against the laps to finish first. Verstappen was up to 5th with 34 minutes left, but then would have a massive lockup while trying to get past Lando Norris, undoing his hard work and leaving him in the runoff area and down in 8th. Meanwhile, at the back of the grid, Russell was having a terrible race and then crashed into Mick Schumacher before blaming him for the crash. Verstappen would recover to a lowly 7th while his teammate controlled the race in first and looked comfortable as ever, winning the 2022 Singapore Grand Prix. On the podium with him would be the 2 Ferraris, and Stroll actually finished ahead of Verstappen. This didn't do much to stop Verstappen's title bid, and he would win the title 1 week later in Suzuka, once again in the race that ran out of time. So let's see what happened in 2023. There would be changes to the track in 2023. Gone was the section of the track in the final sector where Piquet crashed all those years ago and it was impossible to overtake, and in came a straight that allowed for cars to actually follow through that part of the track. And with that, Kevin Magnussen forever keeps his lap record that he set in 2018. So what happened in 2023? 2023 was somehow even more dominant for Verstappen than 2022, and he went into the Singapore race weekend 145 points ahead of second place Sergio Perez. In fact, Red Bull had won all of the 14 races that that had been right up to that point, but qualifying would see someone else on pole because Verstappen was knocked out in Q2 by stand-in AlphaTauri driver Liam Lawson. On pole would be Carlos Sainz, 66 milliseconds ahead of Russell in second. Off the line, Sainz would get the perfect launch, and his teammate even got the jump on Russell going into turn 1. It was a Ferrari 1-2. And things got worse for Russell as he dropped behind his teammate on lap 1. Behind, everyone kept it clean, and we went into lap 2 with all 20 cars still in the race. Well, there was actually 19 because Stroll withdrew from the race after having this crash on Saturday, and Tsunoda had contact with Perez, retiring him. Then the Freedom Tower went straight on at one of the right angle corners and brought out the safety car, allowing pretty much everyone to pit. In an attempt to back up the pack and lose as little time as possible, Leclerc went as slow as he could, but in doing so, got held up by the cars he was holding up. This meant he would come out behind Russell and Hamilton. This pretty much unraveled his race, but Sainz continued to lead out in front. But on lap 43, while running in 6th place, Ocon would retire at turn 1 with an engine problem, bringing out another safety car. This allowed Mercedes to gamble on both of their drivers as they brought Russell and Hamilton in for fresh tyres to try and get past Sainz, who was holding firm. This promoted Norris into second and dropped them both behind Leclerc. The Mercedes pair would now have 15 or so laps to catch up to Sainz and overtake him for the win, and they did just that with 5 laps to go. However, Carlos was one step ahead of them. Instead of being a sitting duck and losing position in a DRS zone, he would use Norris as a buffer behind and keep giving him DRS so the Mercedes couldn't get past him. This would work wonders as Russell and Hamilton tripped over each other and couldn't find a way past Norris, allowing Sainz to stay out in front. He kept up his tactics until the final lap when the pressure got to old Osama and he jihaded it into the corner where the Singapore Sling once resided, retiring him from the race, giving Hamilton the final podium place and handing Sainz the win. This was an entertaining finish to say the least, and it was the closest race of the season and the only one not won by a Red Bull. This didn't affect Verstappen much in the championship hunt because his closest rival was down in 8th and he won his 3rd title in Qatar with 6 races to spare. Let's move on to 2024. In just a year, the climate had changed a bit in F1. McLaren now had the fastest car and Max was starting to lose the title to Lando Norris. The gap was 59 points going into this weekend, and with 7 races to go, it was now or never for Lando's title challenge. He did what he needed to do on Saturday, grabbing pole for Verstappen by 2/10, and then for once on race day, he didn't bottle the start, leading out of turn 1. The car was rapid and he quickly pulled a gap on Verstappen, 10 seconds after 16 laps. While leading by 20 plus seconds, Lando would almost crash out of the race at the end of the second DRS straight, and yet even with this incident, he still had a pit stop over Verstappen in second. He continued to lead after pitting halfway through the race and kept the 20-second plus lead to Verstappen for the rest of it. Behind, Piastri drove his way up to the final podium position, but apart from him coming through the grid, nothing much happened in this one. Norris became the first McLaren winner here since Hamilton did it in 2009 and actually won by a massive margin. You'd think that with such a dominant result, Norris would have been unstoppable for the remaining races. And if you thought that, you'd be very wrong. After this race, Norris would have problematic races all the way up to Las Vegas, where Verstappen would win his 4th title, leaving him to rue his mistakes that were scattered throughout the 2024 season. So now we arrive at 2025. We arrive in Singapore in 2025 with another different scenario. Now we've got the 2 McLarens fighting each other for the title, and they're separated by 25 points. Verstappen isn't much further back, and after winning the last 2 races, is riding on a high with the McLarens having terrible weekends respectively in the previous race at Baku. So let's see what happens this year. I'm going to predict that Charles Leclerc wins this one and the McLarens are going to crash into each other again. Oh yeah, and if you like this one, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Lonzo B, and join the Discord. And why not check out this video on screen now? I'm sure you'll like it.